Joint Recalibration Committee, and I think the first thing is let's take attendance.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. For the Select Committee on School Finance Recalibration, August 25th, Senator Beitman.
Here.
Senator Brennan.
Excused.
Senator McEwen.
Excused.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Senator Schuler.
Here.
Representative Andrew.
Here.
Representative Bear.
Here.
Representative Kelly.
Here.
Representative Nyman.
Here. Oh.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Co-Chairman Heiner.
Here.
Co-Chairman Salazar.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. For the committee's information, I've talked to staff. We're going to bypass the executive session. In all intents purposes, there's nothing to report. The court has not ruled yet. So I think we're a little premature in an executive session. Would you not agree?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, there's no new information to report. I think we've discussed a number of times the court's requirements under the First Judicial District's ruling. Of course, those requirements are stayed pending the Supreme Court's review and decision. But I don't think that's new information to this committee.
Okay. So with that, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the implementation of the 2026 recalibration. Minutes. Oh, I'm sorry. Acceptance of the minutes. Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Good. Okay. We've got, again, the implementation of the 2026 recalibration. Please come on up. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Dickie Shaner, Trent Carroll with the Department of Education. I know the superintendent was planning to be here, but I think probably the schedule change will have her arriving a little bit later. So I will jump in. Our memo had a lot of different updates, but for this morning, we'll focus on the recalibration update portion of that memo. And the first thing that we mentioned was that we began the accelerated reimbursement process for student transportation vehicles. So we completed a data validation and we've done our first round of reimbursements to the tune of about 14 million that were paid out in July. And so that's a new piece of the recalibration or of the bill that was passed that we have begun implementing at this point. We've also done numerous updates to data collections that support the funding model for health insurance, retirement, reimbursement, special education out of district placements. And we've been working with our School Finance Data Advisory Committee, which is business managers from across the state, really getting input from them, superintendents on just the intricacies of the implementation of this bill. And then last, and Trent is prepared to speak a little bit more in depth if there are questions on this, but this rulemaking process has been quite in-depth because we are just making sure that every word is appropriate because every word has meaning in this situation when we're dealing with the funding model and all the different components that were adjusted in this legislation, such as the instructional silo and retirement reimbursements, transportation, cash reserves, et cetera. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to answer any questions on anything related to recalibration.
Okay. Any questions? Anyone? Yes, Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So as we've had an opportunity to roll this out, obviously, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with each of you a few times on this. And I know that you've been getting or having a lot of interaction with districts and working through a variety of problems that they're experiencing, that you're experiencing, and a lot of that comes from either ambiguity in statute or really just little nuanced problems that we've created. I don't know if we want to go through them today or later or exactly when, but I think we need to understand where we may have screwed up the language a little bit, where we can tweak things for clarity, where WDE is feeling like there's not enough specific guidance to know what the right answer is. And what we should be doing is kind of a cleanup bill, right? Different from the major policy bills that we're talking about with the provisions that we're working on, but kind of those nuanced areas. And I've talked to both of you about some of these things, but how do you expect us to proceed on that? How would you like us to proceed? And do you have any ideas for us at this point in time, maybe that we should really already start focusing on for areas of additional clarity?
Chief?
Good morning, committee. Trent Carroll, Wyoming Department of Education. Appreciate that question, Senator Rothfuss. We had our School Finance Data Advisory Committee come together yesterday here in Cheyenne, and we spent a considerable amount of time talking about some of the new data collections that are required as a result of recalibration. One of them is the health insurance funding. As you might remember, there was a kind of a late addition to the bill toward the end of the session that changed the process to a monthly. Basically, we collect the entire year of data, but it's provided to us on a monthly basis so that we can see if there were any changes by employee to plan participation, et cetera. And that has been a huge lift. And I think there's consensus, at least on our SIFTAC committee, that going to more of a snapshot view would be probably a much easier process for all involved, and it wouldn't impact the funding that much. We heard comments from multiple districts that they spent multiple days working on just that one collection. And so that, I think, is a consideration. I think you may hear from some of the folks in the room today about that. That's one example that I think we could look at to reduce a lot of administrative burden, both on districts and on the department staff.
Mr. Chairman, before we go on.
Yes, please.
Address that as we go. So on that one, that was really us being responsive to the interests of the district, and then we gave them what they asked for. It turned out not to necessarily have been the best idea. But it does capture useful information about, rather than a snapshot, the interest that the districts presented was a circumstance where they mid-year hired, and then they wouldn't be compensated for a mid-year hire, something along those lines. I had an opportunity to meet with some districts the other day, and one suggestion that came out of that conversation was a single report, but for each line, just having, is this a 12-month of 12-month, 12 of 12, or a partial, so that they could report accurately, but at the same time, not have to have 12 independent lines for every member. Is that something that you had an opportunity to discuss with districts, or is there a way that we can get the best of both worlds so that the reporting onus goes down, but the clarity of information is sufficient?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss. Yeah, I think we could consider some different options there. One of the ideas that we talked about yesterday was maybe a snapshot combined with some kind of a year-end reconciliation. Maybe there's some kind of a tolerance there. So if you're pretty close, then maybe it's an optional piece. And when we do our state budgeting, we encounter some of the same issues. Our budget is built on a snapshot, and you may have, excuse me, you may have an employee with single level health leave and be replaced by someone with family level health. And that money's not in your budget, but you may have those moves in the other direction too. And they tend to offset to some extent. So I think it depends on the year. It depends on the size of the district and how much turnover you have. There's a lot of different factors, but yeah, I think that we could find a way that we could capture accurate information without having to go employee level detail by month. So maybe we start with a snapshot and then work on a reconciliation process after that.
Thanks. And Mr. Chairman, on that one, I guess I would ask that you follow up with that group and you come up with what you and that group think is simultaneously the most effective, but still gets us the information so that we can be hitting actuals at the end of the calculation. And I think that addresses both interests. And Mr. Chairman, I paused him there. So if you have other.
Mr. Chairman, that was just one example, one recent example that was a pretty big topic of discussion. You know, some of the other things that we've heard, there are still a lot of concerns about the instructional silo. And we're hearing from districts that they have challenges with budgeting this next year for their operational expenditures because of the restrictions around the silo. In our rulemaking process, we are approaching this in a way that we think aligns with the statute, but it also provides as much flexibility as we think we can find under the law. So if there's an expenditure for an instructional purpose, you know, we don't want to unduly restrict a district from using money for that purpose. So yeah, I think that you'll hear a lot of testimony today on these things. Those are a couple of the big ones that we've been hearing about.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, please.
I should have asked on the first one, talking about the data collection. Is that something that we will need a statutory change to address, or is that something that there was enough flexibility that you can change the process and the rule?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, that one I believe would require a statutory change based on that language that was added in the bill.
Excellent. Mr. Chairman, on a different topic, concerns related to special reserve funds and the language that we put into place that requires that certain funds be only used in certain ways. This is largely relative to things like capital construction projects. But we added language to ensure that, for example, major maintenance funding and school facility related funding was used for that purpose alone, which was certainly the case previously, but then the language about general funds not being used in that space. One of the areas that I've heard some feedback on is that you had districts that had been filling a special reserve fund over many years, perhaps using a little bit of general fund each time, and they had a purpose for that. And what I was hearing is that as of July 1, the purpose ends up being severed. So they, unless they transferred those funds to somewhere else, they couldn't use those funds for the intended purpose. And do you have any way around that? What has been the recommendation? And this seems like an area, once again, where we have unintended consequences that took place. So if there's no way to work around that from your perspective, is that something you've been discussing a solution for?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, I don't believe there's a way for us to work around the prohibition around the general fund and capital construction specifically. I think that would be a policy choice for the legislature, and it would require a change in the law. You know, there still exists the ability for a district to transfer funds to the special reserve fund pursuant to the requirements under statute. We haven't heard a lot of concerns about this issue recently, but you may hear more about that today. I think, you know, obviously it's a change. It's a big change. And so there may be specific districts out there that have concerns about this issue.
And Mr. Chairman, the last one I have for WDE, and we'll probably hear more about this as well. When we remedied a few things, we remedied transportation by providing payback opportunities. And you just mentioned that you've worked through a substantial amount of that. We appreciate that. That's a positive. And then also on special education reimbursement timelines, we changed some there. So one concern I've heard is that as a result, this year, school districts will receive a significant cash influx that is just due to us reconciling timeline on payout, right? So from an on the book standpoint, it's just the right answer. But from a cash flow standpoint, there is a significant influx that I think I'll ask two questions about it. One, I don't think that causes any problem for local revenue. And I just want to make sure that as we're doing local revenue calculations, none of these influxes affects in any way the way that we're calculating local revenues. I think that's accurate, that everything's fine there. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, that's my understanding, yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, but it does affect the reserve accounts. And as we look at reserve timeline, are we going to be seeing districts that have to spend out this momentary influx in one year or some amount of it because they're hitting their reserve ceiling because we just poured money on them in a one time when they were probably intending to use those funds over some period of time. Is that a problem we're going to be seeing?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, it could be a problem. It depends on a lot of different things. So I think it would depend on the district's general fund balance without that influx of money. We see districts that aren't anywhere near to the maximum amount that they could carry over. I think it'll also depend on things like school bus leases that are going to be paid off. So we had some districts that had purchase payoffs from prior years that they received a large chunk of money for, and they're going to turn around and use that money to pay off their leases and then get reimbursed for that. And they may have other bus purchases coming in this year as well. So there's a lot of moving parts to it all. I do think that you could see some things this first year, not just with the accelerated reimbursements, but also with a little bit of the overlap that we have in funding in other areas. We've processed, I think, just under $900,000 so far for the special ed out of district placement. So we have about 7 districts that have taken advantage of that accelerated payment schedule. So I think it's district specific, and the extent of the problem, if there is a problem, isn't clear to me. We'll have a much better idea of that potentially in January when we start to do the general fund reserve balance calculation based on the audited financial statements from the fiscal year that just ended. And we'll get those audits by December 15th of this year. So a few more months, and I think we'll have a better idea of what that will look like potentially. But it is something that I think we should be talking about.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, on that point, this really would not impact districts' balances until the end of fiscal year 27, which impacts the fiscal year 2028 foundation program payments. One other thing that's out there that the committee is not aware, but business managers in the Department of Education, is how CPAs are classifying mineral ad valorem revenues collected at the beginning of the calendar year. They see that as a revenue, a deferred revenue, which in some instances, you'll look at a school district's general fund balance in their financial audited statements, and it's negative because CPAs are classifying mineral ad valorem revenue that is not utilizing the certified mill levies by the county commissioners until after a September certification date. So there are several school districts with negative general fund balances, even though they don't have a negative general fund balance. So even if you have a transportation payoff of, $2 million or whatever it would be, they would be able to account for 30% of that or hold over 30%, but they may have substantial deferred mineral revenue that makes their general fund balance goes negative, and the Department of Education would see a negative balance as opposed to a positive balance. So there are a lot of factors at play. We'll know more in January of 2028 what this current school year's impact has on their reserves, but that's just another layer to the complexity of this.
So let me go to my co-chair and then Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Carroll, it kind of surprises me that you haven't gotten many questions about the reserve funds, because I, for one, have received a lot of questions about that, seeking clarification what can be utilized with the reserve funds after July 1st. So do you have any directives out there about what is acceptable use of reserves funds, specifically the pre-97 reserve funds? There's a lot of questions about what can be utilized. Are they able to continue to spend those things, those pre-97 reserve funds on the things they have previously done, or will they be restricted like future reserve funds? A lot of questions surrounding that. Mr. Carroll.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair, thanks for the question. So we have issued guidance on that. The big change there was that the pre-97 funds basically lost their protected status when it comes time to do that general fund reserve calculation. So districts did not necessarily lose that money. That money is still there in their accounts and can be spent. It's just that when we do our calculation, those funds no longer receive that special treatment. So the short answer is yes, districts can continue to use those funds. If they had funds set aside in reserve accounts prior to July 1st of this year, we've also issued guidance that they could use, as long as those funds were transferred in a legal manner, they could continue to use those funds for whatever purpose they were transferred for. And we weren't going to apply some of the new restrictions like the capital construction restriction, prohibition, et cetera, on those funds that were legally transferred before the effective date of the law. So the districts that we did talk to several months ago about this issue, following those conversations, were satisfied that they would be able to continue using those funds in the way that they needed to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Carroll, you had mentioned that, some of these districts are sharing with you their difficulties with the silo. My question has to do with health insurance. What kind of conversations are you having with the districts as far as how they're going to deal with their difficulties and how they're going to deal with the increased costs of health insurance? This committee tried a novel approach to health insurance across the state. That was scrapped for providing flexibility to the districts, but obviously that flexibility comes with increased costs. And we had attempted to really, as a legislature, to ensure that instructional pay was increasing and was matching the model more closely. So, effectively increasing the cost of the employees' portion of insurance could mitigate some of that, at least from the employee's perspective. So just curious what you're hearing as far as how districts are approaching that. And lastly, is it possible that health insurance could be, through your rulemaking, considered a part of the instructional silo, at least for part of the employees?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, we have had some conversations about health insurance. I think some of the folks behind me could probably give you more details about their premium changes for this year and those types of issues that they're navigating. Most of our work recently has been focused on the data collection that we needed to complete so that we can update the funding model for this next year based on their employee plan participation from last year. So a lot of time has been spent creating that collection, working through that collection, and it's been a tremendous amount of work for everybody involved because of the way that we've been doing it with that monthly review of everything. As far as health insurance being considered an instructional expense, we've really tried to create a bright line around the model funding for instructional purposes that's provided in that section of Senate File 81. Specifically for the positions that are considered those instructional positions and other funding categories that are reimbursed separately from the model. And health insurance is one of those that is a separate funding mechanism. And so we haven't thought of that as strictly an instructional silo component, but we have provided guidance that if a district is paying more for health insurance than what they are receiving from the state for health insurance, that differential for instructional positions only could be considered an instructional expense. So we've tried to provide some flexibility there and at the same time kind of maintain that separation between the silo funding and the model so that we can calculate the instructional reserve account balances, et cetera, and also the separate funding that's provided now outside of the model for health insurance. So hope that answers. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other thing that I feel like might be helpful for the guidances and a concern I've heard from districts is concern that the guidance isn't necessarily what proves to be the legally appropriate outcome, and that a couple of years down the road, they'll be held responsible for a guidance that we provided today that a court or someone in the executive branch will deem, well, that was the incorrect interpretation. And so there's some nervousness among districts that they'll be on the hook for something if they opt to make a decision today. So on some of these areas where we've provided guidance, and you and I have talked about the guidances, and I appreciate the guidances you've been providing. I think they're accurate, they're consistent with intent, and they're all generally designed to help out the districts. But areas where you feel like you're stretching with guidance to the point where there is ambiguity and uncertainty, I think it would really benefit the districts to turn those guidances actually into more explicit statutory language as appropriate, so that there isn't that concern that we were ambiguous under statute and that someone might interpret it differently. And I don't know if you have like kind of clear tracking of where, of the guidances you're providing, where are those little red flags that we should provide clarity to the districts on. But I think we almost need a bug fix bill. We need a policy bill, right? Which incorporates some of the new policies we have, but we kind of need a bug fix bill to come forward also, where we're not necessarily changing much of anything, but we're providing clarity on the intent and the areas where districts are confused and where you're having to provide that guidance without necessarily having underlying clarity in statute. Is that something that you feel like you have a good handle on, and that we could get that information from you and try to codify some of those guidances?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, I do think that we should provide that feedback. I think districts will be able to provide some of that feedback this week. We continue to discover things along the way that we may need to update. I'm sure that we will find things this time next year when we're doing our first review of the instructional silo expenditures relative to the instructional silo funding and how we're calculating that. We discussed some of that yesterday, the expenses that we would be tracking for that purpose in the coming year. But yeah, it's a little bit of an evolving process, and sometimes until you go through it once, and so some of these things we haven't even gone through yet, we'll do it next year for the first time. That's when you discover like, oh, a little bit of additional clarity would be helpful here. I think that, some districts will probably say like the solution is to get rid of the instructional silo, right? And then we don't have to worry about all these things. Some of those big questions are policy choices, obviously. I think that we are trying to stay as flexible as we can with how we interpret things. And when it comes to that concern of like, is it going to be a gotcha moment someday down the road with an audit or something like that? I think the more prescriptive we get in our rules and in our guidance, maybe the more opportunity there is for an auditor or someone else to say, well, this didn't conform exactly with what this one rule said. And so I think staying a little bit higher level and broad with that provides some room to operate. And so that was kind of the approach, I think, in some of the language in the bill, and we've tried to maintain that when we've been working on our rules.
Thank you.
Superintendent, good to have you this morning. Sorry about the change in the schedule. I want to give you some time if you have any comments. We've been talking generally about, obviously, the implementation. So please take a few minutes if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Megan Dagenfelder, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Apologies for being late and being flexible with the schedule here. Would just add, of course, you have the memo before you that addresses some. It is regarding nutrition, also regarding, ESA, and then the dual enrollment, which I believe some of these will be on your agenda later today. Nutrition's on later this afternoon, and then dual enrollment, I believe, tomorrow. And so I think those are areas that we'll want to continue to address. I'd say high level would just add, in addition to the memo, need to continue to address activities funding, which is also on your agenda. And then beyond that, particularly for Natrona County School District, the RCA. Calculation of the RCA, how we get to that number and how that impacts districts. I think that there's still large amount of concern over how that is actually calculated. And so wanting to provide that for the districts that we, of course, cannot on our side of the table. So would just add that, and then happy to address any other questions. There's a lot, as you know, Mr. Chairman, we've discussed via email on the dual enrollment. And so I think as we continue to understand that, the definition of school districts, which is referred to in statute, and what complications can arise from that actual language. So with that, would stand for any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up on the ESA. I know you gave us a few figures about where we are right now, but you said you still had applications that you're still reviewing. Is there a cutoff date on that? What do you anticipate for numbers? And also just maybe a question about the money. Are we sitting in pretty good shape with the amount of money we put in for that program? And if you could just give us a little more depth on that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, yes, I believe the memo includes the fact that we will award 4,200 families. However, we received around 4,900 applications, around 4,500 were deemed eligible. And Mr. Carroll can correct me if I'm wrong there. And so, of course, that means there's about 300 or so families that we do not have funding for.
Other questions? Great. Well, I know as you mentioned, taking up dual enrollment tomorrow. Looking forward to that testimony. Any additional comments that you all have for us? Superintendent, anything? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I think what I'd like to do is take some public testimony on this, If we have 4 chairs up here, please come on up. Anyone who has some public testimony on what you've heard so far this morning, I'd love to hear from you. Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Matt Flett, Chief Financial Officer in the Trona County School District. Thank you for the opportunity for public comment on the status of implementing Senate File 81. I have a few real-world examples of how the implementation of Senate File 81 is going in your state's second largest school district. I apologize, this is largely scripted because of how complex this implementation has been. I don't know what month we're in, really what date is at this point. Superintendent Degenfelder stole some of my thunder already. So did Senator Rothfuss on some points. This committee, great job kicking off the day on really tackling some items that really preface for me already anyways. So not surprisingly, the first item is the regional cost adjustment and the impact of model teacher salaries and all model funded salaries at this point for Natrona County School District. As I kind of go through these examples, like just know this, we're really trying to paint a fact-based picture here of what we kind of have experienced during this implementation. NCSD's FY26 average model teacher salary was $65,176, so fiscal year 26, or 4th highest in the state of Wyoming. Under the old model, teacher experience and years of teacher education and years of experience were heavily weighted. Over the past 2 decades, NCSD has put a high value on teachers with advanced education and experience. That is apparent through our salary schedule structure, where it is built to incentivize teaching staff to obtain advanced degrees and continuing their professional development through their careers for expedited higher salaries. As of July 1, NCSD's average model teacher salary dropped from the 4th highest in Wyoming to the 2nd lowest average model teacher salary. Out of the 4 largest school districts in Wyoming, which we benchmark ourselves against, we lagged the other 3 districts between $3,400 and $4,100 in model average teacher salary. For discussion's sake, let's say we're funded for 900 teachers times $3,400. That is a funding delta of approximately $3 million, which is substantial for us. To meet the statutory requirement of Senate File 81's target teacher salary, we had to increase average teacher salary, actual average teacher salary by approximately $4 million. This met the average teacher salary requirement and took our starting FY26 base teacher salary from $54,100, or 15th highest in the state, to $56,600, which now ranks 44th. Of our peers, which are the 3 largest districts in Wyoming, NCSD's average teacher salary was the highest of the 4 largest in the district in FY20 in the state in FY24, 25, and what we assume is 26, with FY26 just getting over. We don't have that data yet. The average teacher salary for FY27, we went from 1st to 4th by a stroke of a pen. Senate File 81 afforded NCSD, which this group beat me to already, approximately $750,000 in new ongoing revenue. We increased our ongoing revenue budget by approximately $1 million because we increased the indirect cost revenue we received from federal grants. Senate File 81 mandated we spend approximately $4 million in new ongoing teacher salaries, where we received about $1 million ongoing. So how do we achieve this? We reduced the district's salary and benefits budget by approximately $4.5 million. which was a reduction of approximately 53 FTEs, and this included 2 school closures. Granted, some of these reductions were already planned because the Board of Trustees voted to close these 2 schools before recalibration ended due to capacity and enrollment projections. However, without those budget changes, we would not have been able to meet the intent of the target teacher salary in Senate File 81. This committee already talked about the one-time money that school districts are receiving in FY27. And just to put some numbers to the example, our FY27 general fund revenue budget did increase by $16.8 million, which is largely depicted in all the fiscal handouts that this committee has seen. Senate File 81 provided NCSD with approximately $15.9 million in one-time revenue, to Senator Rothfuss's point earlier. So an example of that, $2.45 million in one-time bus reimbursement revenue, awesome change. Like, thank you for that. I think that is a huge win for school districts. No longer allowing leases, no more 5-year buyback. You get the buses, 3 months later, WE is paying us back. That's awesome change. Thank you for that. About $370,000 in bus purchase cash reimbursements. We bought some buses in cash a few years ago. And then one-time transportation WRS reimbursement of $750,000. So we have some doubled up Wyoming retirement system reimbursement, which WD spoke about. One time for SPED WRS, about $2.5 million. And then the one-time spent out district placement, about $1.85 million. Same concept as WRS. We're getting out of district placement reimbursement in FY27 for FY26 costs. But now another good change to Senate File 81 is we can ask for reimbursement of these out of district placements earlier. So we're getting reimbursed in 27 for 26 costs, and we're getting 27 costs in 27. So that's why we call that kind of a one-time double up. To explain how NCSD leverages ongoing revenue versus one-time revenue, we have the following points. Just real quick, we pulled this data from WD's crew report. So thank the department for putting this out there. It's out there. The crew report's codified. It's on the department's website. In fiscal year 25, I won't go through the history, but in fiscal year 25, our actual average teacher salary was 14.7% higher than what the model funded. So we have always been paying our teachers higher. That is kind of why in FY26, and thank you to the legislature for the 8.5% sustained ECA and professional, non-professional funding, is we heard a lot of the teachers get an 8.5% increase. And in the Natrona County School District, transparently, no, they didn't in FY26. It's because we're already funding our teachers 14.5% higher than what the model funded. So quickly circling back to the RCA, obviously based on some news articles, NCSD is not in support of the 2025 Hedonic Wage Index. Our Board of Trustees requested additional information from LSO regarding the RCA, and we want to thank LSO staff. They did fulfill our data request in tandem with Dr. Pike is helping us out with that. However, the data provided by the consultants was an Excel spreadsheet of how to run a regression analysis. Like, we can take data inputs, and we have Microsoft Excel licenses too and can do the same thing. Our question in the Natrona County School District are just some of the inputs that are in the RCA. I think when you look at the dirty details of the Wyoming Cost of Living Index, which I think is still prudent, you look at the procedures manual, there's not a collection other than housing rents within the WCLI. They do collect, I thought it was funny, a 12-pack of 12-ounce packages of cores, which can be warm. The lowest cost of a VCR, 4-program timer, wireless remote, 4-head, cable ready at its lowest price, and et cetera are collected. So I think there's a flaw in the WCLI where they're only looking at rents. We're just going to call our liquor stores and tell them report to A&I cores are $40 a case now to boost up our WCLI. But I think it's still, WCLI is still prudent, and it's not heavily weighted in the Hedonic Wage Index. But our issue is with the comparative wage index for teachers. As it says in the report, there's only 5 true county level estimates. The rest are blended together. So Natrona is one of the counties that stand on their own because there's not enough data to have every county stand on their own. It's not credible. Granted, it's hard to argue because this is the procedure used by NCES, the Census Bureau, and C-SWIFT was extended to the counties without enough credible data. However, Natrona County ends up with a very low C-SWIFT on paper. So apparently it's very easy to hire bachelor degree teachers in Natrona County. And we are not PhD economists. It's very tough for us to say what should change in the RCA. And we're just saying, just continue to look at it. We appreciate Superintendent Degenfelder's support on this. Because in a real world example, we are unsure what scripting to give to our human resources department when they're at a teacher fair at the University of Wyoming. You can come teach in Casper because our RCA is 1.07, or you can make $5,000 more by driving east over the hill, but they have a large 1.13 RCA. Do you really want to live in a place with an RCA that high? There's not a person on the planet that's going to buy that. And that's just one example. Same goes for the two other largest districts we're peers with that we also lag now because of 2025 hedonic wage index. Senate File 81 will have a vast negative impact on NCSD's ability to recruit and retain teachers for the foreseeable future. RCA will be rebased annually, but there will likely and hopefully not be large swings. I'm not quite sure how that's going to look. It'll be fact-based, right? I can't imagine having an RCA of 1.13, a no ECA that year, hypothetically, and then an RCA goes down to 1.07. Like, you can't ask teachers, say, turns out our RCA went down, so you don't need to make as much. So keep that in mind going forward as we continue to implement this. Furthermore, because our actual average teacher salary is 14.7% higher than our model teacher salary in FY25, we met the requirement of the target teacher salary in Senate File 81 with the additional compensation provided to teachers, FY27. I'll be the first district to say it today. It renders the instructional silo overly administratively burdensome and unneeded. We need flexibility to address needs as they arise. Because we have increased our teacher salaries the last 4 to 5 years at a dramatic rate at NCSD based on what we're seeing locally and without corresponding average model teacher funding, we have started to experience wage compression within our assistant principal levels. As a large district, we value the Grow Your Own program. We tend to build our own pipeline of principals, from teachers to assistant principals to principals and so on. School admins still play a vital role in the success of the Natrona County School District. By having the instructional silo, it handcuffs us into not being able to address wage compression from our teachers to our assistant principals. I tip my hat to Superintendent Hensley and our curriculum and instruction department providing feedback where teachers are becoming uninterested in becoming assistant principals because their annual salary is closely aligned to our assistant principal salary schedule. Because the instructional silo, it has become challenging to change the salary schedule to recruit staff into admin roles. Additionally, NCSD is a large employer within Natrona County. We value all of our employees. Our human resources department annually completes market studies by job types, similar to what A&I does for the appropriations committee on a state level. We aren't unique. We have to compete at a state level for teachers, but we compete locally for non-instructional jobs that are essential to the operations of NCSD. I'd encourage this committee to return to the block grant model philosophy because NCSD at least has been paying its teachers far greater than we've been funded for historically. And when we met the intent of Senate File 81's teacher salary requirement for FY27, we would really encourage the committee to look at returning some flexibility back to the block grant model in terms of the instructional silo. 2 more points, hang in there. The move from 3-year to 2-year averaging has had an adverse impact on NCSD. We typically project out enrollment 5 to 10 years in advance using many enrollment projection methodologies, such as Natrona County birth rate data we obtained from the Wyoming Department of Health to project kindergarten cohorts. We use a regression analysis on kindergarten cohorts as outlined in the state construction department's policies and procedures, which uses 10 years of regression data, and our own internal 5-year regression analysis that would exclude the impact of the COVID years. Additionally, we use historical cohort survival calculation methodologies for grades 1 through 12 to project enrollment, and then we extrapolate that into funded ADM, which then falls into prior year 3-year averaging. Obviously, we are closely aligned to a decline in enrollment due to lower birth rates that we are seeing nationally. For FY27, our long-range enrollment ADM projection work we planned years ago, then FY27 we'd be funded for about 400 less ADM, and we were very spot on that. By the end of March, and giving us less than 3 months to prep for this, our enrollment projections, as I said, are extremely accurate, decreased our funding by more than 200 students up to 600. So we planned for years of a 400 student loss in ADM, and we ended up with 600. And we had less than 3 months to prep for that. And I get it. There's a ton of other changes that went on in the model as well. A lot of levers changed at once. Lastly, the transfer to the depreciation reserve for capital projects. This was a contentious issue. We brought it up this morning. I think if that was the will of the committee, in statute, we can't transfer more than 10% of the depreciation reserve or the special reserve for capital projects. Could just amend it to like 1% or 0. And I think that would have made things a lot cleaner. Hindsight, we Senator Office point, like what's something we can clean up? If there's a concern, general fund dollars are being moved over to build facilities. I think the intent is still there. It's still a needed tool in school districts' toolboxes. Just reduce the amount districts can transfer over. So here's some examples of what we've done out of that reserve over the last few years. We added a parking lot at Kelly Walsh High School because enrollment was bigger than anticipated when the building was constructed, and there's vast safety issues with traffic flow. Major maintenance cannot pay for a parking lot. We added a parking lot at Pathways Innovation Center due to the increased demand in our CTE programs. We constructed a driver's education training range, probably the only one in the state. This has been a staple in Natrona County for years. It started decades ago. We had a driving range at the Casper soccer fields, and they built the soccer fields 20 some years ago. So they moved us up to the event center. And that's where we had our driver's ed training range until the YO Sports Ranch was constructed. And the city of Casper said, you can't use this anymore because we need it for parking. So within a year, we had to problem solve because we had large discussions of why can't we just give Walmart $100 to use their parking lot on a Tuesday? It is so ingrained in the Natrona County community to have a driver's ed range that because of the flexibility in this special reserve, we went and built a driver's ed range within a year. So we were able to do our own problem solving on that. Additionally, we also remodel within our schools, like for special education space. We can't really move walls with major maintenance. So the reserve does provide us some flexibility on items not covered by major maintenance or can be paid for by the general fund. It's kind of a catch-all. Again, we enjoy the flexibility. Just want to shed light to that. In closing, members of the committee who also serve on the Senate Education Committee, you were reached out to by Superintendent Hensley and myself during March, and we opposed Senate File 81. And as it stands today, we still oppose it. I do think some changes can be made to make this better for Natrona County School District. I don't know how to accomplish them, but we really appreciate this committee's ability to adopt the bill. And you're here today to hear public comment on what tweaks that can maybe be made and address some of those unintended consequences. And we'd love to work with this committee on that going forward. So in closing, we'd like to thank the Department of Education. They've worked a ton of hours, as all of the school administrators have, from March to really today, on getting collections done, interpreting statute, getting budgets adopted. But honestly, it's hard to ride for the brand after getting punched in the face. And we are very optimistic on where Senate File 81 might end up. And we definitely want to be part of the discussion to help make some changes that would make it a little better for Natrona County School District. So that includes my testimony. I'll stand by for questions.
Appreciate that testimony. Questions from the committee? Questions from the committee? Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'll try not to lose my cool over that last comment about punching you in the face when we just spent an enormous amount of extra money on the recalibration. The committee spent an enormous amount of work. It was bipartisan. We did it for the right reasons. Sorry you feel that way. Honestly, I guess this is a thankless job being on this side of things. But my question is, Mr. Chairman, you said you were able to pay your teachers more than the average. Was that because you hired less teachers than what the model recommended?
Mr. Chair, Senator Beitman, correct. We had less staff than what the model funded, or we had less staff hired for instruction, and that freed up money to pay teachers more.
Follow up.
Please.
So with that, created the ghost teacher scenario where you had health insurance for teachers that didn't exist. So you added more money to you to spend on other things.
Mr. Chair, Senator Beitman, that created a scenario when we were able to hire teachers with the additional funding and being creative that we normally wouldn't have been able to fund because of where the funding the model teacher salary was at that time.
In English, please.
I disagree with the ghost teachers comment. We had to use all the tools in our toolbox to be able to pay teachers to recruit and retain them in a Turner County School District. So yeah, if we were funded for 1,000 teachers and we only hired 900, is there 100 ghost teachers? Or did we use that freed up salary and benefits money to be able to hire teachers that we normally wouldn't have by offering higher teacher salaries?
Follow up, please. So how does it help students if you're hiring fewer teachers? If you have less teachers per student, how does that improve education?
Mr. Chair, Senator Beitman, I mean, I think we'd all love a 10-to-1 student teacher ratio, but to your point about it's not economically feasible, we have target student teacher ratios within the Trona County School District that we've set internally. So we don't match what was in the model. We did have, that was how we were able to pay our teachers more, is because if the model said we'll fund kindergarten at 18-to-1 and we were at 20-to-1. So that was the delta.
Follow up, please. So how is putting more money into education spending by what, over $100 million? Punching you in the face when we're trying to make sure that those resources benefit the students and allow for teachers to make more money and allow them to have benefits that are competitive and allow you to hire more teachers to actually hire the amount that the model recommends. How is that punching you in the face?
Mr. Chair, Senator Beitman, I think at a state aggregate level, the $100 and some million the legislature pumped into K-12, from the Trona County's viewpoint, it's just largely smoke and mirrors. We received a vast amount of one-time money we can't put in teacher salaries. I would recommend to the Recalibration Committee, the next 5 years, there was a fiscal analysis missing during this whole process. We looked at, okay, here's what we spent in FY26, here was the budget, here's the foundation program account budget in FY27 with all the recalibration items. I never saw what would have the FY27 budget been under the old model if we would have just provided an ECA of 4%, hypothetically. I am willing to guess, I haven't done the math because we've been very busy with all these new data collections. I bet Natrona County School District would have fared better under the old model.
I quit hogging the mic if anybody else wants to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just trying to find that data and I don't have it here, but I do recall that you came out ahead in terms of an extrapolation of an ECA to current law versus what we ended up passing. I think we ended up where all districts did, if I'm not mistaken, but I'd have to go back and double check that. But is the question I have, Mr. Chairman, comes down to in your presentation, you mentioned that you were getting rid of teachers. I believe you said 53 teachers. Was that an accurate number?
Mr. Chair, Senator Office, yes.
So this is a question I have, and I don't really understand the dynamic of this because of the instructional silo, and I understand that you and some others are not a fan of the instructional silo, and there's debatability there. But from what I heard, you matched the target of the instructional silos average salary. So you adjusted your salary schedule so that it would be consistent with statute. And I understood the concern there that it's not as competitive as it previously was with what other districts are doing. And I'll get back to that in a second, but you matched that number. Did you have excess teachers prior to this new model? My understanding is you didn't, that you, like most every other district, had a deficiency in your number of hired teachers. Is that accurate? You did have a deficiency previously. And again, I can pull it up, but I just haven't had time to pull up the spreadsheet to figure out exactly what that number is.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Senator Office. So what we did with the staffing was prior to the adoption of Senate File 81. That was our exercise internally as a district, which our taxpayers expect us to do, is if we have a building with at 25% capacity, our Board of Trustees is going to look at closing that down. So then through attrition, and thank you for bringing that up, all these FTEs that were reduced, nobody lost their jobs. It was all through attrition and retirements. So that is almost 0.1A of we right-size the district to our capacity of our facilities.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, follow up. The instructional silo should be effectively requiring you to hire more teachers. And that's where I'm surprised that you said you've reduced it by 53. And I'll pull up your specific district in a minute and get what the model produces. I don't have easy access to what it previously produced, so the comparison's a bit of a challenge. But within the instructional silo, there's a number of FTEs generated. There's a number of dollars average per FTE. You multiply those together, that's the instructional silo. That's effectively what you can spend the dollars on. And that number of FTEs, I would expect to be significantly higher than what you had before this legislation passed. I don't see how the math can work any other way unless your intent is to not spend or not aspire to spend all of the funds in the instructional silo. I mean, that was the intent of the instructional silo. And again, whether we agree with it or not, it at this point, it's just math that I'm talking about. I don't see how your math works.
Mr. Chair, Senator Rothfuss, I think, so you're right, just a math question. I think the big thing we've been struggling with, and the Department of Education answered it yesterday in our SIFT Act meeting, they'll be providing guidance on it, is what counts through the silo. I mean, it's tough to generate a budget in April when the ink's not even dry on the bill, and we have this instructional silo we have to contend with. So I get what you're saying with the math, but ultimately, it's a funding model. So whatever it drives out as FTEs, local control would dictate what school boards are actually going to hire for staff. I think that's their prerogative. And I appreciate Senate File 81, Senator Brightman. There's a lot of good stuff that came out of it. It just, right now, today, in August, not great for Natrona County School District. I think the state's heard that from our Board of Trustees. So that is just a point we want to work through.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. So I don't have the instructional silo breakdown, but I do have the overall FTEs breakdown for Casper, Natrona, where the actual FTEs employed in the prior school year was 1,305, 1,306, with under that current law would have been 172 million. And the model FTEs at that point, the modeled were 1,520. With the legislation passed, it goes to 180.3 million with 1,565 FTEs. And the intent there, again, the intent of the instructional silo was to ensure that all of the modeled teachers would be hired because there'd be no other opportunity for that. And again, I truly understand that there is an objection to that policy. But that's the policy that ended up passing, and that's why raises happened. And so we've all had this discussion before. So I simply go back to the math and a failure to understand candidly why you didn't hire 50 extra teachers instead of got rid of 50 teachers. I don't have the exact numbers, but my expectation is somewhere in the ballpark of you're probably 50 to 100 teachers short of what I would expect you to have at this point in time based on the instructional silo. And I hear it was attrition that let go of 53. So my expectation is retirements mostly, and so they weren't coming back anyway. I have a good friend in your school district. She retired. She didn't come back regardless, so I know that happens. But I'm going to keep struggling maybe until I see some math that supports why the decision was made within the instructional silo to eliminate positions when there's nothing else to spend it on. If you're at the mean salary, if you're at the average salary, and you multiply the average salary by a certain number to achieve what the instructional silo value is, there's no other way to do it. So how did you not hire 50 teachers instead of let go of 50 teachers?
Mr. Chair, Senator Rothfuss, practically, it would have probably been impossible for us to hire 50 new teachers. I don't think there's 50 new teachers out there for us to hire. And understand what you're saying, and that is a concept that we have to work through, is that Senate File 81 really changed the block grant model from a funding formula to a spending formula.
Mr. Chairman, well, that's not what it did. I mean, it constrained a certain aspect of it based on a policy interest of trying to fill all of those teacher positions with teachers. And that's a debate and a discussion that's been going on for as long as I've been in the legislature. And so whether it's desired or not, this was an intentional policy shift of try to get those dollars spent on teachers in classrooms and teacher salaries that are appropriate for those teachers in classrooms. So we don't need the talking points and what goes into headlines about spending versus funding, et cetera. I really just want to understand why it didn't do that. I do understand that there aren't enough teachers in the state to fill where were we at? It was an awful lot. 1,700-ish. 1,700 teachers are not out there. And that was why we put in the reserve account for 3 years to allow you to carry that over, because it would take a while to tool that up. But I didn't hear you say you struggled to hire enough teachers. That's not the report you gave to us. The report you gave to us was because of SF 81, you had to let 53 teachers go. That's what the press is going to pick up, and that's what we've been hearing. And candidly, it just doesn't math out to me. I mean, I get a lot of the other problems. I really do. You've heard me. This is one, I'm an engineer. I kind of look at the math first. I don't get the math. I don't know how any district can say SF 81 caused us to let go teachers. I can't fathom that. I can see letting go other positions. I see a lot of other things that were challenges, but that's the one that does not ring plausible based on SF 81, how it's structured. So I'll just ask one more time, and maybe we need to follow up, and maybe I need to look at your district in detail, and I don't have the data in front of me.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, one last follow-up, keeping it purely math, and we can follow up offline too, Senator Rothfuss, 100%. Remember, I said 1A was we reduced the size of our district because we had to match our enrollment funded ADM. But with the requirement, so that was not because of Senate File 81. I'll be very transparent on that. But without doing that, without freeing up that $4.5 million, we couldn't have met the intended target teacher salary that we had to spend $4 million on. Additionally, if we would have hired 50 more teachers, let's say a teacher's $100,000, that's $5 million more ongoing that we had to put into our budget on top of $4 million that we are required to spend. So we're at $9 million of additional ongoing funds that we did not have in Senate File 81. So when we talk math to math and the funding model, FTEs, at the end of the day, brass tacks, rubber on the road, if we'd have done all that, we'd have had a $9 million ongoing increase to our general fund budget when Senate File 81 afforded us an extra $1 million annually for FY27. And we can continue to talk about that offline, but at the end of the day, that's the money in, money out.
Mr. Chairman, just one more follow-up. And I guess we will follow up offline, but the data I have suggests that it afforded you $7.6 million of additional revenue. And I don't know why that wouldn't be accurate, but you did say you lost an additional 200 ADM that you weren't anticipating. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chair, Senator Roth is correct.
Okay, so from that perspective, and that, you can go back and look at that might be a source of some of this differential. But that again is not because of SF 81, that decay, that is the ADM, although we switched from 3 years to 2 years, so I understand that that's going to lead to a shift, but that was already baked into the numbers I had. All right, we'll follow up and I'll try and understand that better. Thank you.
Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at this from the high level view. No tall joke intended there. We're looking at statewide, and based on the testimony, what I'm hearing is Natrona County went from one of the highest paying districts to one of the lower paying districts, but they gave raises. So it's not because they had to cut pay. It's because most of the state gave so much larger raises, which was one of the intended consequences. Another point I heard was that it was difficult to hire assistant principals because money had to go to teachers' salaries. So we're talking about the requirement to keep money going to the instructor's compensation made it difficult to hire more administration at a time when enrollment is falling. So while I'm not privy to all the details of what's going on in Natrona County, I just have the information I've gotten today specifically. There's a call here to repeal the silo, despite the fact that it has succeeded in bringing that type of increased compensation to teachers. Our overall concern is recruitment and retention of teachers statewide, not in one particular district. So while I'm not going to pretend like the Senate file did not have warts to it and we don't have bugs to work out and problems such as activities, which we'll get to later, I'd like to hear some input rather than just throw the whole thing out and go back to the model that increasingly made it difficult to hire and retain teachers statewide. When we're having the success in getting that recruitment incentive across the state, what can we do to improve this model short of going back to what not only wasn't working, but was struck down by the courts?
Mr. Chair, President Kelly, I want to be clear. I never wanted the intent of that comment to be we're adding more APs. It was more we are trying to build a pipeline because as a large district, we're looking 3 to 5 years down the road all the time. So it was more, we just don't hire teachers to become APs. We have a program where they come through cohorts and whatnot. So it was more trying to build a pipeline, knowing we have retirements coming up in the number of years. And then I hear what you're saying about the old model. Like, we wouldn't suggest going back to the old model really either. I think there's a lot of good things in Senate File A1. We need to tweak some things, but ultimately that I think is a disconnect between my testimony today and maybe the committee is you're looking at a statewide level, which you should. I'm here advocating for the Natrona County School District. You're right. We increased salaries a ton throughout this state. It was just a tough pill to swallow when Natrona was nowhere near the types of raises we could give compared to other districts because of the regional cost adjustment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that qualification. I would just like everyone to please consider what an impediment it is to do improvements for the kids across the state when we start to case our language and our disagreements in terms of almost vindictive language. Somebody who's a third-degree black belt, I understand what a punch to the face feels like. So I would ask everybody to please let's remember we're on the same team. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that you didn't support Senate File 81 or the instructional silo. But as a direct result of Senate File 81 and the instructional silo, did your teachers get a raise this coming year?
Mr. Chair, Representative Heiner, they did.
So we were successful in bringing additional money, bringing teachers up to the market condition because of Senate File 81 and the silo. So one of the other things in your testimony, you mentioned how previous to the silo, you were able to expand and fix up some parking lots. Prior to doing that, did you ask the teachers if you could take some of the money that is supposed to go to their salaries to make a parking lot? Did they agree to that before you actually did that, taking their wages and putting it on a parking lot? Was that voluntary?
Mr. Chair, Representative Heiner, we have a very robust budget process in the Natrona County School District. So all the transfers we did to our special depreciation reserve was one-time money left at the end of the year. And that was forecasted a year before we made the transfer. All those transfers are put in our preliminary budget that we have in April. And our board budget committee is made up of teachers, administrators, board members, all stakeholders for our district. So to your question, yes, they did, because we involved teachers in our budget setting process. We're very transparent on, we project out of our $260 million general fund budget that we're going to have a few $1,000,000 left over, right? Because percentages on that large number kicks off millions of dollars. So April that year, we say, okay, we have some needs coming up. Let's profile a $1 million transfer to the depreciation reserve in the next fiscal year. And we do that like 14 months later. So to your point, yes, I would say teachers had a say in that because they're part of our budget building process.
So, Mr. Chairman, so just to be clear, the teachers all agreed to have their wages suppressed so that they could build a parking lot. And they agreed to this for the past number of years, not to get market pay. Take some of my money, I'm a teacher, take some of my money that I rightfully should have to be up to market conditions and build a parking lot instead. So they all agreed to this.
Mr. Chair, Representative Heiner, again, it goes back to, we are already paying our teachers far higher than the model even funded historically. And additionally, the money transferred and profiled in our budget to the special appreciation reserve was one-time money. There's nobody, I would never make the recommendation to put $2 million of one-time money into ongoing staff salaries. That is how you get a structural deficit in your ongoing budget. And that's what runs into school districts' insolvency.
One more follow-up, please. So with the instructional silo, the money cannot be taken out of that instructional silo to go to a parking lot in the future. So with your wage increases for those positions within the instructional silo, they all got raises this year. Will there be any money left over that you're just stashing away in a reserve account, a special reserve account within the instructional silo? Or are you giving that money in increased wages as was intended by this Senate File 81?
Mr. Chair, Representative Heiner, we just got final guidance really on like what is, so we know what's in the instructional silo based on the model of what builds how high it is. We're just receiving final guidance on what fills up that model or the instructional silo. So to be determined, I mean, based on what's in law right now, if the instructional silo is 80 million and we spend 84 million, great. But ultimately that impinges on other operations of the district. If we spend 70 million, then we have $10 million left over. It's not as, it's a very difficult calculation at this time of the year for this large of a school district.
So with that 10 million left over, what do you intend to do with that that's left over?
Mr. Chair, Representative Heiner, to be determined. We don't know what, we're just taking this implementation very slowly. And that's why we met the target teacher salary. We were given raises even if we didn't adopt Senate File 81. We gave raises in years when there wasn't a sustained ECA because we know teacher salaries increases are important. So as of right now, I guess we can't answer that because we're still working on what this is all going to look like.
Thank you. Sorry to belabor this, but so is it your intention for your district to staff up, to hire the paras, the instructional facilitators, the tutors, the aides, everything that the model contemplates that is now in the instructional silo for the betterment of our kids' education? Or are you just not gonna, you're just gonna refuse to hire those people?
Mr. Chair, Senator Beitman, we are not going to rush into any large mass hirings, to be frank with you. We don't want to put ourselves in a spot where something changes and then we're in an even worse predicament because we have these staff ongoing wages that we rushed into hiring. So we understand the intent of Senate File 81. We hit the target teacher salary, and now we're kind of just playing it day by day to see how this committee works, this work plays out, to see what maybe changes happen during this next legislative session. So we're not going to go out and potentially build a structurally unbalanced ongoing budget because of what's in the model.
Follow up. So is it your intention to get rid of the instructional silo in the next upcoming session? Is that why you're holding off on hiring these people? Because you're trying to, hopefully with the new legislature, you'll be able to get rid of the silo and then be able to spend the money on, go back to the way things were, and you'll have a whole bunch more money to spend.
Mr. Chair, Senator Beitman, transparently, yeah, we'll be advocating for getting rid of the instructional silo.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, real quick, Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen has had his hand up online for a minute now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question. What's the percentage of admin people versus teachers in your district?
Mr. Chair, Senator, I would have to get that number for you. It's going to be 1% compared. It's not as much as you think, but that is something I can follow up with this committee and provide. And I think that information might be readily available to this committee based on LSO or Department of Ed analysis. But if you'd like me to follow up directly with you, Mr. Senator, I can.
I would, because I think it's 56 to 44.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I would have a hard time believing that, but let me follow up with data I don't have off the top of my head.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I finally dug through my stack of papers to find the table I was looking for that had the instructional silo numbers before and after Senate File 81. Now, the before numbers should be correct for the 25-26 school year. The after numbers, this was the second to the final draft of the bill that this was printed for. So this might not be exact, but it's going to be very close because we didn't make substantial changes after this was produced. But the actual hired FTEs that would have been in the instructional silo categories for Natrona County School District, so these are actual teachers employed in 25-26, was 776. Theoretically funded, although we understand that it was short in terms of total dollars, but model was intended to be 942, but you didn't have the money to do that in the instructional silo. With SF 81, the intent of the instructional silo at this point for the Natrona County School District 1 is 1,003 fully funded teachers. So you didn't have the money before, and you had 777-ish classroom teachers, so instructional silo. And the intent of SF 81 is to shift resources such that Natrona County School District has 1,000, each making around $73.3 thousand on average. And again, this is where maybe we have some follow-up. That intent was a policy decision by the legislature to try to ensure that at its core, first and foremost, and this is consistent with the Supreme Court decision, right? We're trying to adhere to a Supreme Court decision that says we're not providing enough funds to achieve a suitable educational environment for the state because we're not providing enough money to hire the teachers that we modeled. So SF 81 comes back and literally provides enough money to hire all the teachers that the model intends, and then actually goes a few steps further and extends the number of teachers slightly beyond what the court was asking for. And it's my understanding that the position of the Natrona County School District is to not implement that. That's what I'm hearing. The intent, not just we're struggling to, but what I heard in your response to Senator Beitman was Natrona County School District number 1 intends to not spend those instructional silo dollars on instructors. So my question is, what are you going to do with those dollars? Just put them in the reserve and hope that we change the legislation and give you those dollars next year?
Mr. Chair, Senator Rothfuss, we hit these for FY27. We met the statutory requirement of the average teacher salary in the model to compare what our actuals were. That's in statute. The intent, we are not going to rush into what the legislative intent was. Again, it's very complex. This instructional silo is so new. I don't think we have anyone in this room that fully understands what it's going to look like at the end of June 30, 2027. So I'm going to stop short of saying we're going to educate students and we're going to pay our teachers to the best of our ability, but we're not going to rush into hiring 50 new teachers. We're not going to add $5 million of ongoing general fund budget without doing a deep, because then we have to do a deep fiscal analysis of like, hey, then what are we doing? Are we going to cut our SRO programs? Are we going to start looking at all this stuff that isn't funded, which I know this committee is looking at through the model, and get rid of those? So we just have, to meet your intent of the instructional silo, we just have a ton of analysis to do.
Mr. Chairman, but it gets back to the simple math of you literally can't spend the money on anything else.
Mr. Chair.
So I don't know why you're making a trade-off. That's where I'm a little bit struggling here. It's not like the money is in the block grant and you say, all right, well, we're going to spend it on SROs because that's what we want to spend it on. You can't. You've got a certain number. You've got $73.3 million-ish. Again, we'll right size that number because, well, this is the wrong ADM, and
Sure.
And so there's some problems with my $73.3 million. But you've got a number that's comparable to $73.3 million that can only be spent on 1,000 educators. That's pretty much the end of the list of what you can do with it. Although we obviously have flexibility. You can hire contractors that are educational contractors and other things along those lines. So technically, if you were using your SRO as an educator, which we have districts that do that, but you would have to be using them as an educator, not just pretending they're an educator, to be consistent with the state law. I am really struggling to see the advantage of not following the law when there's a lot of money that's going to be left on the table in that reserve account, and you let go 50 teachers. I don't get it.
Mr. Chair, Senator Rothfuss, I guess we just have a difference in math. I mean, so let's say we want to hire these 50 teachers. That's $5 million new dollars. Where's that going to come from? It has to come from outside the silo.
Mr. Chairman, it's in the silo, right? You can't use the money anywhere else. You have a certain amount of money in the silo. It leads to a certain number of teachers. The only thing you can hire effectively is for instructional purposes, so teacher salaries. It's not new, we have a new expense. This is the only thing we can spend it on. I don't see how the math is working out as you're suggesting, that you would have to take on a new obligation that you're not going to be funded for if the funds are in a restricted pool that you can only use for that purpose. And it seems to me, honestly, and I'd be concerned as a constituent of Natrona County School District Number 1, if I learned that funds were being withheld from teaching, classroom sizes were larger than they needed to be because of an intentional desire not to follow legislative policy. I would be concerned about that.
So I want to recognize Speaker Nyman, but I have a question. Do you agree that Senator Rothfuss's comments, that is the only way you can spend that money through is with teacher salaries?
Mr. Chair, based on the statute, yes.
You do
That is
agree?
within statute. That is, and like I said, we just received guidance on, we know how tall the silo is going to be. And we just received guidance what's going to fill it up.
Okay, so having said that you agree with that, your testimony is simply you're not going to spend it on that.
Mr. Chair, no.
Okay, then help me.
Yeah. We are taking our time implementing this. Very transparently, yes, we didn't go out to hire 50 new teachers. From just a straight revenue budget, to add $5 million, that's where I think we're getting caught up. We have model funding versus our actual cash in, cash out budget that we have to pay our bills with. And I think we're just taking a very conservative, slow methody, I can't talk. We're just taking a slow approach to how this is going to play out. Again, I don't think anyone in this room knows what the silo is going to look like at the end of June 30, 27. We just received guidance. So now we can do a projection of here's what we're funded for 27. Here's what we're going to anticipate to spend. And I think once we are able to do that calculation, before we had to guess. For a number of months, we worked with the Department of Education, the SIFTAC, on is health insurance in or out of the silo. That to us is a $20 million swing.
No,
We
I
had-
understand the challenges.
Yeah.
I do understand the challenges. Okay. Speaker Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. This has been an extremely revelatory and interesting exchange. I guess, there's several things that call into question in this as I've listened to this discussion. Based on the testimony I get here right now, we have been actually overfunding educators in the classroom because previously to the information that good Senator Rothfuss brought us, the district was actually being funded for 942 positions. They were actually hiring 776. So with that information at hand, our understanding is the reason they were not able to hire that full 942 is because you just simply couldn't offer the dollars that were needed to really make hiring attractive. And so that was one of the major impetuses in putting this in the silo, is to make sure that the districts would not struggle to be able to hire the number of teachers that the model was requiring. So that brings me to another question is, are we getting good information on the model? Because I'm starting to come to the conclusion based on this conversation that we are approving the hire or the positions of far too many educators because, and I say this with this, now we have gone from 942 to 1,003 while still wanting to actually reduce the number of teachers that were actually hired. It makes, and to Senator Rothfuss' point, it makes absolutely zero sense. We were neglecting or opting not to fill positions so that we could take those dollars and give them to other positions to make them more attractive for hire. Now we have structured this to put it in the silo to allow our districts to have the opportunity for secure money to be able to offer these job opportunities. And we're still saying that that's unnecessary and that we are evidently don't need it because we were already more than taking care of it before, and we had adequate teacher levels at those levels. That's counter to what we're being told, is that we are not having enough people in the classrooms, which we made available, but now suddenly we don't need. And so, or are not asking for it. And truly, sir, I'm very concerned at the fact that we did all this effort to try to make sure that we didn't put districts in a difficult position by not being able to hire the amount of people that were being asked to fund as a state for each one of these based on the ADM numbers. But now we're saying that we are not still going to hire those folks. And so this I think really the silo to me has pulled back the curtain on some really important issues here, trying to make sure that the monies were readily available to our districts to fully fund and to compete with our dollars in the job place and make sure that we get highly qualified people in there and make sure they're paid well. But with the idea that we should have been able to fully fund that, we've placed those dollars there for you guys to use, but obviously they're not necessary. And it bothers me that we are still not going to hire these positions now that you have security. In my mind, this was providing security for the districts to know that those dollars are going to be there. And so very, very interesting. I mean, this has been a very interesting exchange, but it's starting to tell me that this has shined light on some issues in funding and actual just directions for funding that I think only the silo and SESF 81 would have been able to do. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to more conversation here, but evidently we are offering more money for more teachers than what are really necessary based on this district's discussion here. And so maybe we need to have more of a discussion with our consultants as to what are the necessary numbers in their districts, and why are we being asked as a state and taxpayers to spend a lot of extra money on folks that are not going to be hired and haven't needed to be hired, evidently based on 776 actual versus 942 previously being funded, and now 1,003.
Okay, response, please, if you have any.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your comments. I guess the biggest takeaway that I want to leave with this committee is Obviously, we're not impressed with the RCA. The instructional silo, we can talk about it all morning, and we're going to follow the intent of the law. And again, Senator Biteman, like, it is a thankless job what you have, and we do appreciate the legislative branch, all the work you guys do. But ultimately, we're not going to, I've been very transparent, we're not going to rush in and hire 50 new teachers just because a mathematical equation told us to. We're going to take our time and play all this out. We hit the intent to target teacher salary, which is in statute. The rest of this instructional silo, we're going to wait for the Department of Education to provide us final guidance. We're going to work through it this fiscal year. I think to the constituents of the Natrona County School District, that's what we offer them. That's what they deserve. We're not going to rush out and just hire people because a mathematical equation said it. We're going to take our time and do this right. Will we maybe get to a day where we hire 50 new teachers? Maybe, but it's not going to be hiring 50 new teachers in the fall, or in the spring, before a July 1 effective date of the biggest change in school funding in 20 years in this state. That to me is reckless. And we just want to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And again, we appreciate the discussion on the instructional silo. Again, we're taking our time and being conservative. We have a very fiscally conservative board and district leadership to see how this all gets operationalized. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes that comment.
What I'd like to do is I'm going to continue public comment, but I want to take a 15-minute break. So I'll bring this meeting back to order, and I want to continue with public testimony. So having said that, sir, good to see you.
Good to see you. Good morning, co-chairs. Charles Oskey, Superintendent, Johnson County School District number 1. Make this kind of short. After our last recalibration meeting in Lander, you challenged us as districts to present, wouldn't reference it as challenges, but opportunities that have come from Senate File 81. I just want to reference that we did send you, I think, a 16-page document of how it impacted us. And the reality is, per the Speaker of the House's comment, it pulled back the curtain for us on the operations portions of things. Things that we had been paying for that weren't funded. Those are some critical areas that that I would like to bring to the table as a superintendent in the school district of a district right now that in the operation portions of things is about $900,000 to $1 million short, just because I'd identified some of those things. Some of those key points would be the RCA, really seeking understanding. I want to bring that across the table, seeking understanding of why the districts surrounding us, with exceptions to our neighbors, Natrona, we're at a 107 and everybody else is a 112.13. The Bighorns look the same in Sheridan County as they do in Johnson County. So, and I think some of those costs. So just seeking understanding is more rather that what I'm coming to the table is why does that RCA look a little different? Because it does create a competitive salary base for a pool of teachers that right there in that region. When you're 30 to 40 miles away and we're competing with some of those, that RCA is a big factor. But the other one is food service. I know we're addressing that. That's super exciting. The other part to look at is that infrastructural piece with technology. I'm not talking one-to-one technology. I'm talking that infrastructure support and how we fund that moving forward. There's some questions with what that looks like. A big hit to us, which was a surprise, had to do with our custodial and our facilities. So those are some things that down the road I'd like to just at least surface today and have future conversation about that. I think there's some tweaks that we can bring to this that would truly make it a cost-based model based on that operational portion. So thank you for the time, and I'll stand for questions, but I just wanted to point out, and I will resend that to you, co-chairs, that implementation opportunities that Johnson County School District number 1 had.
Great. Thank you for that testimony. Appreciate it. Any questions? Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Oskey, on that operations shortfall, does anything pop out at you as kind of the key contributors and anything we can fix on that? What are the main factors in that shortfall?
Yeah, great question. So co-chair Senator Biteman, we've been robbing Peter to pay Paul with a block model. Let's just call it what it is. And so obviously the one that surfaces the most with that was food service, which you knew about it. We're going to try to address that. The big one that scares me the most, to be honest with you, is the support of that infrastructure and technology, no matter what the size is. As we move forward with that. So those are two big ones. If we're going to talk a little bit about, it's not just Senate File 81. I want to take a rabbit trail here real quick and plan another thing. We in Johnson County School District number 1, along with every other school district, are also taking on the challenge of implementing the K-12 literacy, making sure we're putting teachers where they need to be, have the literacy programs where they need to be, and the change in new graduation requirements, which, you know, kind of parallels with what we're talking with concurrent and dual enrollment too. We're providing more opportunities. How do you balance all that? Well, the thing for Johnson County School District number 1 is our enrollment's down 300 kids over the last 7 years. So last year, in addition to this was our funding cliff for ADM. So we're trying to balance that as we go through that piece. But if I come back to that, the next challenge right after we start talking about that infrastructure is really making sure, because I'm a true believer we're doing the right things in Johnson County School District with literacy, is maintaining or sustaining a literacy program that's good K-12. We're solid K-5, 6-12. We are in the let's figure it out stage, I think, like everybody else in the state. So hopefully that answered your question. Thanks.
Thank you. Superintendent Oskey, 2 questions. The first is on the information technology, talking about that it's obviously broader than just one-to-one and the infrastructure. We'll go into that more deeply later, and you'll probably provide some testimony on it. But can you talk a little bit about the personnel side on the information technology aspect as well?
Yeah, so the operations, because this all falls under the operation portions of things. So that staffing piece to maintain that infrastructure and to be in the buildings and make sure technology is up and running is probably just as critical as the components that go along with it. Couple things is we don't have the funding for a tech director, which I think is critical, especially for a district our size. I know there's options in other smaller districts, but those are challenges with especially providing security for the data of our students and everything else we do. The reality is, as a superintendent and as a school district, we're not focusing on putting kids in front of screens. We want to be teaching. But what we're losing the fact is if we unplug one wire and we shut the district down, we shut telephones down, we shut how we communicate, we shut all our reportings down, we shut everything down. And you would think the world's coming to an end, which it really didn't. We'll be all okay. But our infrastructure is everything from phones to lights to software that we do to provide you data, the Power School information, SIS systems. There are a lot of things that now are all technology. And we can thank COVID for that because we pumped a lot of money into our infrastructures to get onto virtual programs, but it wasn't just the virtual programs. It is to get our software, our accounting software. We went through a change in my second year. We went to a new accounting software so we could find efficiencies. And I promise you, as long as I'm here, we will never do that again because there were a lot of tears and there are a lot of ups and downs through that process. But I can now tell you, we are solid with understanding where our money is going, and that's a critical component. But that took 2 years. It didn't happen overnight. But that infrastructure, when it goes down, we need to provide information, communication to parents. Just think about that. We live in a world right now where when I was in school, I don't know how my mom figured out what I did in school, but somebody called and told her that. But now parents are wanting to know everything immediately so that it's not just what we do to operate. It's that solid communication with our websites and what we're doing with parents and getting kids to the right place and being protective of that. So also as a district, and most districts around the state are going to one platform. When I got to Johnson County School District #1 5 years ago, in some cases we had 3 or 4 platforms for the same thing. We're moving to one platform so we can easily manage it. We're moving to Parent Square this year with the communication piece. So we are looking for efficiencies. It just takes time.
Mr. Chairman, one other. You also mentioned kind of custodial, groundskeeping, those types of operations costs. My question is, can you give us a little more detail there? And is this something where we were funding it short before and we're still funding it short, but now you're noticing it? Or is this something where we made a change?
Absolutely. So I'll just tell you, it hit me pretty hard. It's like, whoa, because we were supplementing it. And when the wheels are turning, you don't really take a look at that. But now when we're saying, oh, this is what we have. But let's go back to facilities and maintenance. So when the funding model, this is from understanding from Connie, my business manager, when we took the salaries that how we were getting paid for our facilities people and turned it into a custodial salary, which was less, that was a huge impact of almost 250 to 300,000. Then just the ADM, let's talk about that impact with custodial staff. We still have the same number of square footage in the building. We just have less kids. So when ADM drives the number of custodial staff, that has an impact. However, what are we doing about it? So those of you who are familiar with Bruco is a cleaning system that basically does with K-12 public schools. We had them come in and do an evaluation of what we actually do need and don't need. So it's a great opportunity to look for an efficiency. We found some efficiencies, but in all honesty, I don't know if we found $400,000 in efficiencies in the custodial part of things because the square footage of the buildings didn't go down. However, there are other components, several $1 million in component projects. So thank you for the approving. It's a process. It's taken 3 years to get into what I call the component project pipeline. We're there. When I got there 5 years ago, we had over $30 million worth of projects that needed to be upgraded in order just to protect our educational space. So we're working on that. HVAC projects in KC, and now we're moving them to Buffalo High School. So thank you to the legislation that supported the fundings of those buildings because we got to keep the buildings up and running to keep the kids there no matter whether the ADM's down or not.
So, and we were working on that yesterday, obviously in school facilities and making sure that we've got sufficient component funding and also talking about some of the other concepts. But as far as the Recal Bill and School Foundation program, then your key takeaway here is that even before we were underfunding, that routine maintenance and groundskeepers and the keeping up of the facilities aspect of it was insufficient before. Now you're realizing that, and we made a change to how we were funding salaries for it, and that ended up exacerbating the problem. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, kind of pull back the curtain, as the speaker said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful.
You know, another thing that, oh, sorry, just to add on to that, another thing that looming when we talk 4 to 5 years down the road is, what if E-rate goes away? We know the federal government's done some things that are more importantly, even with the literacy piece of that, what if Title I funds change down the road? So looking at some of those federal programs that we do use to support not only the infrastructure with E-rate, but some of those programs that we support our at-risk kids with Title I funds, as we are all in what I want to say, trying to understand where we're going to be in a couple of years with some of those programs that really do impact kids. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions, Superintendent. You mentioned a couple of options. I know we're going to talk about food service later, but could you talk about your option 1 and option 2 in terms of food service? And then you also talked about potential ways to increase revenue and be more efficient. Could you kind of just elaborate on that a little bit?
So with food service, specifically to that. So there's lots of options that you guys are going to look at today. So they're all exciting because the fact is we're looking at options. That's a cool piece. So I want to encourage that we find something and not just talk about it. I would love to see some type of formula that generates an FTE in the model per your ADM, so that it includes them in their insurance, health insurance. That's a part of it, but some type of simple formula. If I remember right from Lander, we talked about another state that uses some other type of tax to kind of help pay for that piece. But if we could at least get some type of formula that will create an FTE, and then for our staff that provide those services, that we can fund them with their insurance, because that's a critical piece to recruiting and maintaining some quality people in those areas. Those are probably the 2 priorities. I would love for you to stay away from the free and reduced population formula that you have in there, because that is dependent on every district being a little different. And that would probably be my last option. Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman, Senators, Representatives. My name is Janet Farmer. I am currently the Health Services Coordinator for Laramie County School District Number 1, but I'm here representing school nurses across the state. I currently serve as the Wyoming Director to the National Association of School Nurses. So we're kind of a small group. We're outside of that educational silo, but we do have a few things that I would like to point out to you. I want to start by stating that school nurses are eternally grateful to be included in this funding model. As far as I can deduce, this was a first for our profession. We're kind of unique in that we're medical professionals inside the educational world. Without any kind of requirement in previous funding bills, school nurses were many times thought to be extra, and oftentimes nursing duties were combined with other positions. On March 19th, shortly after the legislative session concluded, nursing.org published an article entitled, "Wyoming Just Guaranteed a Nurse in Every Elementary School. Here's Why It Matters." Nursing.org is an online news and information website specifically focused on the nursing profession. Shortly after that article went out, I started receiving messages from school nursing peers across the country and from our national organization congratulating our state on the win for school nursing. I repeatedly explained that the devil was always in the details, and in this case, there are lots of details. I started referring to this as actually a funded non-mandate. I don't know if that's a correct term, but it seems like a correct descriptor to me. In the recalibration bill, educators and other classroom staff, as you all know, are placed in a silo and protected. You know all about that. These are funded mandates. By placing everything else in a separate group, it gives the illusion they are protected, but in reality, they are not. by placing nurses, counselors, principals, custodians, all in the same funding source with utilities, activities, nutrition, insurance, maintenance, and then decreasing those funds, it means that something or someone will lose. In researching the consultant report used to draft the 2026 recalibration bill, I would like to point out just a few gaps. The consultant report cites the 2020 National Association of School Nurses position of 1 nurse for every 750 students. That 1 to 750 student ratio was used if all students are healthy. In that same position statement, it states that if there are significant health concerns in that student body, that ratio decreases to 1 nurse for every 250 students. NASN has a new position statement put out just last year that clearly does not include a hard and fast number because there are so many variables that must be considered. Sociocultural, economic, and environmental, along with physical and mental health, do play a large part in the success of every student. These factors, along with a myriad of others, make assigning a number nearly impossible. Some other concerns in the consultant report were that I was never able to really discern where the 1 to 330 students actually came from, unless they were trying to make it similar to the counselor ratio, which is also 1 to 330 students, 1 nurse to 330 students. Unfortunately, I know you all like people to come with solutions, and I don't really have a solution. I would hope that there would be a way to fund all areas appropriately without creating more silos. I am confident you will hear over the next 2 days from a wide range of interests that are not in the protected silo. Many daily costs have increased significantly over the last few years, but those increases should not have to be shouldered by a select group of professionals just because they're not in the classroom. So I'd be open for any questions.
Mr. Chairman, you have one online if you'd like to take that. Mr. Chairman, I'm bringing Jeremy Smith into the room.
Jeremy Smith, please go ahead if you can hear us.
My apologies. I think I was muted. Mr. Chairman, Jeremy Smith, business manager with Sheridan County School District Number 1. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to attend by Zoom. This is our first week back to school, and my paid job requires that I have some duties that I have to be attending to this week here. I'll keep my comments brief. Mr. Chairman, our school district is very different than lots of school districts in the state of Wyoming. We are a growing district. So the ADM implications and issues aren't really impacting us. I have deep sympathy for my neighbors around the state where you're trying to adjust to a new funding model with silos and requirements and all those kinds of things, while at the same time trying to maintain programs with reduced kids. I have deep sympathies for those districts. In addition to that, Mr. Chairman, we were a winner in the RCA lottery. So my comment goes back to something I said a few months ago as you embarked on this process, that the RCA and it not being updated for 20 years is going to create some problems. It sure did, Mr. Chairman. It shuffled the deck on where districts were relative to one another. Our district finally is in the position of being at the same funded level for a teacher salary as our neighbor, where we all shop at the same Walmart. I think I kind of made that comment earlier. So our district is very appreciative of where we landed in that RCA lottery, because I think the problem is no one really understands all of the components of how it's calculated and what little movements in those inputs will do on the output. I think we're all kind of waiting with bated breath in terms of what will the RCA be next year for districts, because we don't have a sense of what kind of tail wags that dog yet. So more to come on that, Mr. Chairman. But I think what you're hearing today is a lot of issues with how the RCA reshuffled the deck of where districts are relative to one another. A couple of good things to point out in this implementation, Mr. Chairman, and I think perhaps it's been said earlier, the change in how special education and especially out-of-district students are funded is a massive improvement for districts in how they can operate. And two, transportation as well. Those capital purchases of buses were significant. The legislature had tried over the years to try to help that, but this bill certainly made that a very big improvement. So, Mr. Chairman, a couple of warts I think that I would love for you to reevaluate in the future of this is really that special revenue transfer, or I should say special reserve transfer. You've now basically said no, and I think we'll find some reasons why you should say yes, at least in certainly with curbs or sideboards or whatever you want to call it for the purposes of that. But I think every district has a story about something that its community wants us to do to represent them well. And I think the reason we would put certain amounts in there over time, knowing that we had something we needed to deal with 5-10 years down the road. And so we would put some funds in there to deal with that, certainly not taking anyone's paycheck money away, but just obviously addressing what our community wants for us to be able to provide for its kids. So just a couple of things on that. And then, Mr. Chairman, I go back to it again, and I said it in Lander. I think the issue with interest earnings, I think you should wipe that back out of the bill, but I might lose on that point as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to end with the RCA is the big hairball, and it continues to be the big hairball. And so I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman. And certainly, one more point. For the first time ever, I asked in 29 years, I asked our district to pass a deficit budget. And it was entirely related to the four things that you're addressing on the operations side during this meeting. You started the conversation in Lander. You're going to continue that with student technology, food service, activities, and school safety and security. So if this body can sort of fix those components, because you're right, the instructional silo issue really just pulled the curtain back on where we were with these other operational items. If you fix those, Mr. Chairman, a district like mine is in a really, really good position. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I certainly stand for any questions.
So very much appreciate those comments. Any questions? Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, are you seeing problems anywhere else? Like we heard about groundskeepers, for example, and custodians, where we're potentially underfunding there for Johnson County. You mentioned the big four that we're working on, but this is our opportunity to understand other areas where, when you look at what you're getting in funding and when you look at your budget, they don't align. Anything else come to mind, even if they're on the smaller side, where we can do some tweaks and fix things?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, thank you for the question. Yeah, trying to be succinct in my comments, but opening this door a little bit. I think Charles Oskey, the superintendent Johnson, said it well. If you're in a district whose ADM is declining, but your building isn't also declining at the same rate, you're really up against it. And so you had some of this conversation in select school facilities yesterday. The building size is what the building size is. Our specific example is we have all of our buildings have been rebuilt except for one under the new formulas. However, not all of our buildings are at 100% capacity, but we're not funded for that. And so I think the tweak fix is, if a building was built under the metrics assigned by the School Facilities Commission, you pay for 100% of the building square footage. Stop playing a game with ADM, because that's really the uncontrollable factor of the district. I still have to clean the entirety of the hallway, even if it's slightly less used. I have to still clean every bathroom, even if they're slightly less used. And those costs don't change. In addition to that, Mr. Chairman, I would make a comment about the reason we saved up money is because oftentimes major maintenance doesn't handle certain components of a building or certain needs of a building. And so if you get those formulas all right, because again, you pulled the curtain back on all of it. We used to just kind of put the money in a pot. our boards, elected boards would divvy out how it needed to go. Well, now the problem is you can really see that the impacts that ADM has on routine and major maintenance. They shouldn't have any impact on it. Not frankly, not unless you're going to tell them to get rid of a building at a certain capacity level. Natrona's done a decent job of that, right? Close schools as they can. Well, guess what? I can't close Tongue River Elementary. It's the only elementary for 30 miles, right? So you're not closing it. And I can't whack off a wing of it. I still have to clean the whole thing. But it was built bigger than we needed. And a good thing, we're still not full, but we're still filling it up. But I'm still not funded for the whole building. So I think you really have to go back and understand what role ADM should ever play in facility maintenance, whether it's routine or major, because the roof sure didn't change size, even though there's 2 less kids in it, but I got less money with those 2 less kids. So I think you have to re-examine sort of the model funding components of routine and major maintenance. And really it's driven by square footage and age of a building. And that should be about it. So I hope that answers the question, Senator.
Other questions? Again, I appreciate your testimony. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Kylie Wall, and I recently graduated from Natrona County High School in Casper, Wyoming. And I recently spoke to the Recalibration Committee in Lander about the one-to-one funding, technology, and AI in schools. I know that we haven't gotten to technology yet on the agenda, but I unfortunately will not be available tomorrow. So I was hoping to give my testimony today. Since my testimony in Lander, I have taken the time to do a little bit of investigating and talk to students from all across the state of Wyoming, all from completely different backgrounds and all with completely different political views. I did not find one single student out of all of them that was not somewhat passionate about this topic. I have a few that will hopefully be testifying later today and tomorrow, and some that will be for sure testifying to the committee in October. The students that I have found, and I believe the students and I have found that we need to seriously reconsider the expectation that every student needs a school-issued device. I grew up with the one-to-one model. I actually learned under it, and from a student's perspective, I don't think that we're getting our money's worth. Having a Chromebook in front of every student does not automatically mean students are learning more. A lot of the time, in my experience, it means the exact opposite. When every assignment, reading, worksheet, quiz, and textbook is put on a screen, it becomes incredibly easy for the students to stop actually engaging with the material. There is a huge difference between sitting down with a piece of paper, writing something out, taking notes, and actually thinking through an answer versus clicking through tabs on a Chromebook. And I think we've forgotten that. Students still like paper. We still like writing things down. We still like being able to highlight a page, physically take notes, work out a math problem with a pencil, or read something without staring at another screen. And we want to actually start learning cursive again, something I unfortunately was never taught to do in the public education system. We're already on screens constantly outside of school. I don't think the government needs to spend millions of dollars making sure we're staring at them for another 7 hours a day. And now we have another problem that makes this conversation even more important, which is artificial intelligence. AI has completely changed what having unlimited access to a computer in the classroom means. A student can have an assignment on one tab and an AI program on another. Within seconds, they can have an essay written for them, a question answered, a paragraph summarized, or a math problem solved. Teachers are now being put in an impossible situation of trying to determine whether they're grading a student's work or a computer's work. And I'm saying that as someone from the generation actually using these devices. And I think that if we continue designing classrooms where every student is expected to have a computer open in front of them all day, I don't think we should be very surprised when students find a way to let the computer do the thinking for them. That is not education. Now, I'm not asking you to eliminate technology from Wyoming classrooms. Technology absolutely has a place in education. There are classes and assignments where computers are incredibly useful, but useful is not the same as mandatory, and that is how it is treated currently. We do not need a taxpayer-funded device sitting in front of every single student every single day in every single classroom simply because that has become the standard. If a class needs computers, schools can have computer labs. Devices can be checked out when they're actually necessary. There are plenty of ways to give students access to technology without funding and maintaining a permanent one-to-one ratio. And that money is pretty important. It's kind of the whole reason we're here. Every device has to be purchased, eventually has to be replaced. It has to be maintained, managed, updated, repaired, and supported etc. When thousands upon thousands of devices are involved, that becomes a continuing expense that we're expected to fund every single recalibration cycle. So I would ask this committee to look at this from a very simple perspective, and that is, what are we actually getting for that money? If students are demonstratively learning more because every child has a Chromebook, that would be a conversation. But if students are distracted more, retaining less, relying increasingly on AI, and asking to go back to paper and pencil, then maybe it's time to admit that putting a computer in front of every student wasn't the educational revolution that we were promised. Education should fund what helps students learn. I am asking you to remove the one-to-one student device ratio from the recalibration model and give districts the flexibility to provide technology where it is actually needed. Put the focus and the money back on teaching students how to read, write cursive, think, solve problems, and learn for themselves. Because it's, at the end of the day, is the goal to make sure every Wyoming student has a computer? No. It's to make sure every Wyoming student gets a proper education. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
Well, it's good to hear from an actual customer. So thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Any questions? Appreciate you take the time. Thank you so much. And I appreciated your Lander testimony as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? I think I'd like to start then, since we're getting into a time crunch here, I'd like to start on the school safety personnel. If we can get a start on that. Obviously, I'll be taking public testimony all throughout today, this afternoon. So everyone that wants to be heard will be heard. Welcome.
As always, it's a pleasure to be here. And we're glad to be helpful. I'm gonna put up or set up my my PowerPoints as we'll go through it, and will help us organize so I don't speak for too long. Keep things rolling. Well, but only as much as I need, not more. It was my goal here. So let me I need to find my share button here. And there is the one that I want to share. And it should be, look at that. It actually worked. I'm feeling pretty confident here today. Again, you're familiar with the three of us. I also added the name Anna Adams on the, oh, you joined us already. Okay, excellent, man. I've encouraged him to come testify as a school resource officer. So he'll be sure he makes it into that group. Anna also worked with us, but she's not joining us for the presentations today. We have 4 topics that we've been asked to talk about. The first 2, school safety personnel, SROs, and school nutrition food services. As you know, we have recommendations in the recalibration report that differ from what the court has said need to be considered and to be done. And so while we haven't changed our recommendations per se, in that we've been asked by the committee to help estimate what the cost would be and help think through those issues. So that's our purpose here. Technology is largely similar in that regard. And then Mr. Wilmarth and I will talk together, probably mostly Mr. Wilmarth, on the modeling that we've done in regard to what happened, the conversation that took place at the end of the meeting in Lander about the student activities fund.
Dr. Pikus, I want you to know, just for the sake of our schedule today, I'm not expecting you to get done at 11:30. Your testimony can roll over after lunch as well. So please don't rush through this.
No, Mr. Codier, I understood that to be the case. As a professor, sometimes I feel like I'm trained to talk in 50-minute bursts, and I wanted to prevent you from having to go through that. That was really my point. I'm sorry if you misunderstood. We understood that there's time on the agenda for today and tomorrow, and we want to be sure we're available to answer all your questions as well. I'll try and we'll start with school safety personnel, and I'm going to turn that over to Mike, and he's going to push the buttons and do that as we go forward.
Great, thank you. Thank you, chairs and members of the commission. I'm going to walk you through today our preliminary estimates for school resource officers, how we got to these numbers, what they mean. We also have a tool available that you can make adjustments on your own and see real-time results. So part of this conversation, we're going to talk, and we've talked about this at a couple of your other meetings. What was the actual court language? What are the needs that we have heard from school districts for SROs? Talk small amount about funding in other states, possible issues with supplying services for SRO services in Wyoming, and then the options or, the cost that we derived at. 3 points were made in the court ruling. As a result of local innovation, SROs, school resource officers, have been shown to be needed for a proper education in Wyoming. Therefore, all Wyoming public school students are entitled to the benefit of school resource officers, and school resource officers have been established as appropriate for the times and should be implemented for all school districts. That was the language within the court ruling itself. So to determine what does this mean, what it would be proper coverage for school resource officers, we went through several different methods of research. First, we looked at what does the national research say. Then we reviewed SRO policies and funding approaches in all 50 states. We interviewed Wyoming district personnel regarding school resource officer staffing, responsibilities, and local needs. We conducted professional judgment panels to help us gather more input from educators, administrators, and stakeholders about the need for SROs in school districts. We analyzed the statewide SRO funding survey that was put out. And then finally, Dr. Pikus and Dr. Brown attended the 2026 Wyoming School Resource Officers Personnel Academy in Casper on June 2nd and 3rd. To hear directly from practitioners. So we took all of these sources to help us better understand what are the needs for SROs and how are they currently being provided in the state. What we found was that in high schools, there is a requirement and a need to have a presence of a full-time SRO officer. But in middle schools, there is a need for SROs, but not to be stationed there necessarily, but to be there to support students, and even less kind of needed supports in elementary school, even though there still are supports needed. We also found that a shared service model in which SROs provide support to multiple middle and elementary schools may be more effective and cost efficient to approach as an approach for these grade levels. Our research identified a couple of possible issues for SRO services, including what happens when a police department or sheriff's office in a community is unwilling or unable to provide SRO services, because what we found is that the districts go out in contract for the SROs. They do not hire them themselves. At least there was none that we found that do that. The hiring your own SROs does happen in other states, but there are a lot of complexities to that. And then how can services be provided to remote schools that are not located near police or sheriff offices? So with all that in mind, this is what we came to as sort of conclusions for our model for costing out. Found that one SRO per high school is appropriate, one for every 2 middle schools is appropriate, and then one for every 3 elementary schools. There was an emphasis, we heard this especially in our interviews, that there's a need for training and professional development. And all SROs should receive that each year, especially enough funds to attend at least the state SRO meeting. So we put within the model $2,500 a year per school resource officer for professional development. We also heard there was a need for supplies and equipment. During our interviews, we found this amount ranged greatly from district to district. In some cases, they put little to no money within supplies and equipment. In other cases, they put a very large amount, including purchasing of police cars. What we found was about $5,000 seemed to be an appropriate amount per SRO per year. If you notice the last line there, this would not include money for police vehicle purchases. It would not be significant enough for that, but it would be significant enough to cover almost all the other supplies and equipment needed for a school resource officer in a school district. To determine the salary and benefits for a school resource officer, we looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data on the median wage for a police officer in Wyoming. They have that data for the 2025 calendar year. We increased that amount by the Consumer Price Index to come up with a number of $33.15 per hour. We also looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics benefit cost, and that got us to $25.59 per hour for all benefits. Then we looked at the length of the contract. What we heard during our interviews was that the SROs are obviously needed throughout the school year, but there's additional support needed for after-school activities or summer school activities. So we included an additional 15 days for those. What we primarily heard was football games, to be honest with you, need additional support and SROs present, but also some other school activities or dances. And then there was a mix kind of there, did they use SROs for summer learning or not? So again, that's why we included the 15 extra days to be available for those kind of activities. The number of hours per day is 8 hours. With all of that, and this is just some kind of breakdown of the cost for what they use in Utah. Utah has one of the more generous funding formulas that they provide grants to school districts for school resource officers. And those grants can be used for school resource officer services, school safety specialists and school safety training, safety and security training for law enforcement agencies, communication hardware, software equipment, training for first responders, enhanced physical security, and first aid kits for students in classrooms. So in other words, although this is the dollar amount we're providing, we would suggest that it be flexible in a way that it can provide either SRO services or these other support services for safety within schools. Can we pull up the model? Yeah.
I think we can. Stop that. Get the right way it is.
There you go.
Okay,
Great. Is that good?
that should be it.
So we put this all together for you in a model that you can adjust to take a look at, but you can see right now with the choices that we have made, it would create 172.5 SRO positions in the state, costing about $17.1 million annually. Yeah. Again, these can be adjusted based on some of the input we'll hear today or some other decisions, but this gives you a general understanding of where we are. And this does include, and I didn't mention this in the presentation, we have included the regional cost adjustment as part of this. So that takes that into account. And this is for co-located schools. So if the schools are together within a single building, they would receive one SRO or a portion of an SRO based on whatever the highest grade within the school is. So if it's a K-8 school, we would treat them as a middle school within the formula. We erred on the side of being more generous towards a higher position. If we did this and moved it to every school, that would raise the cost. But again, some of these schools are co-located. Let's see. Oh, not too sure why that's not working. Let's see if any of these things are working. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, so it gives you an idea. That's kind of where we're at. One of the other options that is out there is either looking at all schools, again, some of them are co-located, or looking at schools that are within a distance of each other. We didn't do that, but that is another possible option, depending on the SRO support you wanted to provide each school. And I'd love to, any questions?
Thank you. I did hear the 17 million for the 1-to-1 in high school, 1-to-2 in junior high, and 1-to-3 in elementary, but I didn't hear your number for all 1-to-1 in all schools.
If we did 1-to-1 in all schools, it would be 30.6 million annually. Yep. And that's the end of my portion of the presentation. Love to, any questions, or if you'd like to look at some other numbers on the spreadsheet now that I have it open, happy to do that, or.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you may have mentioned this already, I can't remember, but during your panels and all of your investigations around the state, how many districts chip in? Well, I know some pay for the entire amount, but how many districts would have their cities or their counties chip in somewhat on the SROs?
A decent number of them, Senator Chairs. We didn't break it down, but in a lot of the conversations that we had, very often what you would hear is there would be an MOU between the district and the sheriff's department or the police office. And it would be for a dollar amount that was available, that the district had available. So say $50,000. And then what you find out is that the sheriff's department had another grant or additional funding, or they were just kind of covering it out of their own hide to pay for that. That's why right now you see this huge difference in SRO services from district to district, because some of these sheriff's departments have the extra resources for various reasons. Others apparently do not. So there are some districts that don't have any SRO support, while others have fairly large SRO supports. So.
Thank you.
Anything else on safety officers? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your testimony, you said that most states do not actually hire SROs. They work in a collaboration with the local police officers, police department or sheriff's department. But what you're saying here is we should go out and hire SROs, which contradicts your testimony. Am I getting that right?
My apologies, Representative and Chair. If that's what you heard, if you read our full report, we do not say that. We say that these are the dollar amounts that are made available. Then we recommend contracting with the sheriff's department or the local police department for these hires for all sorts of reasons. When they're not equipped to hire SROs, they don't need an SRO full-time during the full year. It's just during the school year. And then, there are all sorts of human resource issues surrounding that. So our recommendation is that this is the dollar amount that's made available, but then you go out and contract to have someone to have another agency.
Mr. Co-Chair, I don't mean to interrupt, but I heard you say something about we would hire, implying the state would hire. And I think what Mike was saying was that the funds would flow to school districts who would then contract with local law enforcement agencies. So the state, it's not our recommendation or intent that the state would be the employer. And so, but that's the word I thought I heard you use. So I just want to make sure we were being clear as to where we went. And if I'm wrong in what I heard you say, I apologize.
Okay. Follow up. Please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Griffith, we're supposed to be doing an evidence-based model based on the evidence. And what I'm hearing is as the school districts are contracting with police departments or sheriffs, they're paying about $50,000 for that service. And now you're recommending that we fund this at $100,000 amount. So if it truly is evidence-based, why doubling the cost of what's actually being spent out there right now for SROs?
Representative, Mr. Chair, it's an evidence-based study that we're doing, but it also is mandated by the courts. What we did find is that I used that 50,000 as an example. There are the amounts that are being spent by school districts range greatly. We actually have that, I think, in our report. You can also see that in the SRO survey that was sent out to school districts. This is the model we have come up with based on our research and interviews to meet the court mandate, which is supplying SRO services to all schools. Currently, that is not happening in the state. And in some of the cases, like I said, the places that do have SRO services, they're being funded either through federal grants or available money that exists within the sheriff's department, or the sheriff's department has just chosen to do that. But there are other districts that don't have those services. So to meet the court mandate, based on our research, this is the model that we've come up with.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Griffith, you repeatedly said mandated by the courts, but maybe I can refer to our LSO. I believe that is on stay right now, so we have no mandate by the courts to actually do this because that is on stay by the Supreme Court.
Mr. Chairman, you are correct that that decision has been stayed by the Supreme Court, but there is a valid court order that was issued by the district court. And the representations by Larry Pikus and his colleagues is correct. So on that particular point, the court said it didn't prescribe a staffing ratio or the number of SROs per school, the qualifications, or a particular funding mechanism. There was discussion of categorical grants and cost sharing as referenced from an earlier report. So I guess you're sort of stuck in this holding pattern until you have a Supreme Court decision. But certainly they are correct that the district court order mandated SROs be accessible to all schools. And as you might recall, they undertook this work at the direction of the committee. When you started this effort, that stay had not been issued, and you continued this committee to explore possible cost-based funding mechanisms for those elements that the court identified: food service, SROs, one-to-one technology.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair, if I could add one thing
Yeah,
that
I
I hope is
think-
helpful.
I guess I can't prove it, but I can't, my guess is, and it's just my opinion, that the court is looking at this committee on what our actions are going to be in the coming months. But again, I can't prove that. Dr. Pikus.
In terms of the issue of evidence-based, the challenge here is in our previous recalibrations and in the current recalibration report, what we stated was that there should be enough police officers on duty to manage the security needs of schools without any state funding. Okay, that was the position that we took, and we haven't changed that part of the report. Since that time, and with your permission, if I could make Manny a temporary colleague of ours, he'd be prepared, I'm sure, to share what SROs do beyond the what we had envisioned as what SROs do. There's very little research. When we look at how you should organize a school and think about teaching and learning, there's a great deal of research that we've gone through, Alan and I and my colleagues here, for 50 years on what schools can do to help students learn. It gets trickier as you move away from what's going on in the classroom and what we know about learning. There's very little research evidence that talks about the appropriate roles of SROs, except for literature that has found that in some instances, the presence of school security officers has led to increased, what's the right word I want, but catching more children in violations of rules and things that aren't always necessarily in the best interest of the children. And what Dr. Brown and I learned in June when we went to the conference with the SROs is that the SROs do a whole lot of other things. And so as we think about what those are and try to estimate what that would cost, assuming that there's something that the kinds of costs that should be put in place were the kinds of things you would want to fund, we've tried to build a model that estimates what that would look like, but through a model of contracting with local law enforcement agencies, because as you can see, between his uniform and all the equipment that he's wearing, most school administrators really aren't trained to know how to hire or equip a sworn law enforcement officer. And there are police departments, sheriff's departments throughout the state that are better able to do that and can also manage the insurance better. So that's why we've thought it's a way of how much should it cost, how much should it go to school districts. And then in talking with Matt Wilmarth in a couple of days leading up to this meeting, one of the other challenges is we've used schools as the proxy for how you assign school resource officers. But it seems challenging to have in a school with 45 children, a full-time school resource officer. On the other hand, availability needs to be closer when those schools are remote. And so we've used those kinds of measures, the one at a high school, two at middle school, one at an elementary school. And when you get very, very small schools, there'll be a lot of them, more SROs per pupil than in larger school districts, but it helps accommodate for the sparsity. And it's, these contractual arrangements are difficult to work out and do and undo on a year-to-year basis. So we've tried to use the logic of basing it on schools rather than on a per pupil basis. And that's somewhat different than the way this has been before. But again, as I said when we started, I don't want to say I'm on shaky ground. I want to say we're here trying to advise you as the best way to think through how to provide SROs if you decide that's what you want to do, and if the court decides to say that they're necessary. And I mean, my understanding is courts can't tell you exactly how to fund SROs. They can tell you we think you need them, and they can tell you whether or not they think you got enough of them or too many of them. They probably wouldn't tell you that. And so it's sort of that back and forth between the court and the legislature, and working to get to what the right number is in a continually changing environment. But I think when we've answered your questions around what this sort of stuff is, if Manny could be your first public testimony, if that would be appropriate, I think he can fill in a lot on what SROs do. He was very eloquent when we saw him in June.
Mr. Chairman, before we go on, I want to go back to this evidence-based. You're saying that we need 172 SROs to be able to fulfill the court mandate. But now we have evidence that school districts are paying about $50,000 for an SRO as they collaborate with the local police department. But here again, evidence-based, you're coming back and saying, instead of $50,000, we need to provide $100,000, so double the amount. So I'm not following your logic here that we're using evidence cost-based numbers to come up with this $17 million, because school districts that are already contracting with police departments are paying half of that amount. And so if your mandate is to use existing costs and be a cost-based model, how are you coming up with double the cost? And you're not providing us any comparison with Utah. You're referencing Utah as one of the premier states that are doing this, but you're not showing us what they're paying. So this evidence base, I'm not seeing that you're doing the evidence base with data that we can actually look at.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. What I would suggest is that the evidence, this gets right back to the discussion we had earlier about the silo. Okay, remember, there is no funding for SROs to school districts. So the funding that school districts have used to provide SROs have chipped away largely at other components, but mostly instruction, because it's the biggest part. Okay, now you've created a silo, which has led school districts to say, now I don't have the money to do that. But even when they were trying to find resources to do it, what we found when we went to school districts and asked them, the evidence is not that they're spending $50,000, but the evidence is we're spending $50,000, but we wish we could employ more. Okay, and have more officers and be able to pay for more of their time. And so what we're offering you is an estimate of what we think, based on what it costs, based on the contracting costs, what it would cost to have somebody there 190 days a year for the, 172.5 FTE to make that work. Okay, so if the district contracted at $50,000 for a school resource officer, they wouldn't have 190 days of that individual's time. They would have less because of the salary, insurance, equipment costs, and all the things that go into having an SRO. So the evidence is more along the lines of what is the right number of SROs to have, and then what would it cost to have 172 full-time or full-time equivalent SROs. So we're thinking from that direction. And that's why 50,000 isn't the number that we used. If you spent $50,000 on the same number of SROs, we would roughly cut this cost in half, but it would be hard to have 172 full-time equivalent SROs across the state. So we viewed our task as, how many do you need, which is very difficult to estimate. We've brought up these problems, the challenges of distance and all the other sorts of things that come up with it. And the state of Texas requires every school to have an armed security guard, 11,000 of them. But most school districts hire hourly security guards from other companies. And that's a very different kind of thing than what we heard in Lander from, I forgot Jake's last name, but Manny's colleague Jake at the SRO Association, and what Manny's going to talk about in a little bit. So that's the evidence we've used as opposed to the $50,000 number. Hopefully that's makes sense. And you have data on Utah.
Sure. To answer your question, Representative, Mr. Chair, it is 75 million a year in Utah, but it also covers both SROs and hardening of schools. So that they've allocated over the last 4 years, it's averaged $75 million. So, but much larger state, right? So probably, I think 7 to 8 times larger in student enrollment than you all. So if you do the numbers, it's roughly equivalent, but maybe a little lower in Utah spending than this here.
7 to 8 times, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, please.
7 or 8 times larger, that's about $50,000 equivalent. So if you take 75,000 and make that adjustment for 7 or 8 times bigger, that's about $10 million, which is about half of the 17 million that you're proposing here. So it falls back to evidence-based. We're not lining up here.
Mr. Co-Chair, I guess what I would say is that what I think we're saying from the evidence we're looking at is if you wanted to fund 172.5 full-time equivalents school resource officers, and you provided school districts with enough money to pay $50,000 for that many SROs, they would likely only be able to fund about half of that number of SROs, given what the cost of the contracts are. And recall, the evidence is based on what school districts have argued, and again, I don't want to put words in the mouths of people who are sitting behind me, but they have to find money from somewhere in their own budgets to do this, and they have to find agreements with the cities and the counties that they work with to get these folks. And so they're working out compromises and other sorts of things. Now, what I can't answer is what role or what shared cost should or could cities and counties agree to. So we think this number makes sense, but I'm hard pressed to tell you that that's exactly right and you're wrong. That's not something I want to try to suggest here or move down that road. We're kind of in an unknown about how much money we really need till we see how they're used and what they do and what they're able to provide. And is that the right number? Is that the right allocation of their time? And there's really very little evidence to anywhere in the country to really make that decision. So I'm stumbling over an answer because I'm just thinking of the evidence we collected versus the evidence that we see on the table at 50,000. It's managing to work those out and advising you that it's all more than I told you should have when we recalibrated, which was let the police department do it. So, I might come at 0. Although I think there's probably some valid reasons why SROs are important to have in schools and need to rethink that as well.
Any questions? I definitely want to hear, but I don't want to chinch the time just because we're at a lunch cutoff time. So it's my preference that why don't we adjourn right now to give you the full time for your testimony when we come back, and then we will continue this. So committee will stand for lunch at 11:30, and let's come back at 1:15.